Hey guys, welcome to our last video on taxonomy. Using what we learned in the previous video, we're now going to classify the various vertebrates, fish, reptiles, amphibians, and then mammals found within the phylum Chordata. Okay, so let's talk about fish. There's three types of fish that we need to know about. Number one is jawless fish. These are sometimes referred to as agnatha. Two is cartilaginous fish, often referred to as chondrichthyes. And third is bony fish, often referred to as osteichthyes. Osteichthyes has the root osteo in it, meaning bone, and chondrichthyes has the root chondria in it, meaning cartilage. Now these three groups of fish have three things in common that make them a fish. Number one, they have gills. Two, they have a lateral line, which we're going to look at. And then third, they have a two-chambered heart, which we looked at in the previous video. So all fish have gills, and gills are modified pharyngeal slits, and gills are used for respiration. There's two types of respiratory methods found in nature in fish. Number one is buccal pumping. This is having water in your mouth and forcing their mouths to pass water onto their gills. This is often referred to as opercular pumping. And then the second type of respiration is going to be ram ventilation. This requires constant swimming with their mouths open to ram water onto their gills. Now, why is it water? Well, water is oxygen rich. It has oxygen in it, so their gills are specialized for grabbing that oxygen found in the water. Fish also have a lateral line. This is running down the mid-sagittal plane of the animal, and it's a row of sense organs that detect movement in the water, pressure changes, and vibration. All fish have a two-chambered heart with a single atrium and ventricle that both give and receive deoxygenated blood. You might encounter the word swim bladder. Now, swim bladders are not present in all fish, but some fish have it and they fill it with air to control their elevation or buoyancy in the water. Then lastly, for their excretion, all fish excrete ammonia as their nitrogenous waste product. Let's look at the first type of fish, and that is a jawless fish, also known as agnatha. So no jaw here, and a good example would be a lamprey or a hagfish. They don't have a jaw and they don't have scales, so scales are not a key characteristic of all fish. They also don't even have bones, and remember, bone is not a key characteristic of a vertebrate because they have cartilage. So you can just be cartilaginous and still be considered a vertebrate. They also do not possess a swim bladder for buoyancy. They are also oviparous. What does that mean again? Well, O, it looks like an egg. Remember, this is releasing eggs externally into the environment, so there is no parental care here, and the embryo relies on the yolk provided in the egg for nutrients and development. So hagfish secrete slime for defense externally on their integument, on their skin. Remember, these are still considered vertebrates despite not having a complete vertebral column. Lampreys, on the other hand, are parasitic. They have rows of teeth that you can see right here that are used to latch on and suck blood from a host. So they are parasitic. The second group of fish we are going to look at are going to be cartilaginous fish, also known as chondrichthyes. So a shark and a ray are key examples here. So sharks do not have bones, they just have cartilage. Unlike jawless fish, we get a jaw here. And the jaw is actually developed from the gill arches, which are the pharyngeal slits of a chordate. Sharks and rays also do not have a swim bladder. They do have something unique though, and that's called the ampullae of Lorenzini. Now this thing's pretty cool because it can sense the electrical field produced by living things. So it's a specialized sensory organ. It's also been theorized that they can detect the Earth's magnetic field, so they can use that for navigation. One unique thing about chondrichthyes as well is going to be a cloaca. Now we're going to see this in many types of chordates. A cloaca is a single opening used for the excretion of nitrogenous waste, digestion, as well as reproduction. So they have one hole that's specialized in three systems. Now speaking of their reproduction, you have many types of cartilaginous fish that expressed oviparity, viviparity, as well as ovoviparity. So you have all three types here. The last group of fish is bony fish, also known as osteichthyes. This is the type of fish that you probably think of, like tuna, salmon, and trout. So of course they have an endoskeleton made of bone. They also have a specialized bone called an operculum. This is the bony cover for the protection of their gills. Unlike cartilaginous fish, they do not have a cloaca. But just like cartilaginous fish, they also have oviparous species, viviparous species, and ovoviviparous species. So you have all three types found within this subgroup. They can also be sexually dimorphic for sexual reproduction, as well as hermaphroditic. So here's just a tangent, but clownfish, those are the type of fish that Nemo was, Finding Nemo. Nemo never lost his mom because his dad was a hermaphrodite, meaning that when his mom actually died, his dad became his mom, which is actually what happens with clownfish when they lose their partner. Now you might encounter two subgroups of bony fish. Number one is ray-finned fish, and two is lobe-finned fish. Now under the class lobe-finned fish, you have lungfish, and lungfish are bony fish, and they have both lungs and gills. Alright, so that's it with fish. Let's move on to amphibians. So an amphibian is going to be a frog, a toad, and a salamander. These are tetrapods. Tetrapods are animals that have 4 limbs. They are also ectothermic. They're ectotherms. The internal body temperature of an ectotherm is going to vary with the external environment. And ectotherms are sometimes referred to as cold-blooded animals informally. One unique thing about amphibians is cutaneous respiration. So cutaneous, of course, meaning skin, and they have moist, permeable skin. No scales here. What's interesting, though, is when they're a tadpole, they have gills for respiration, and those gills are going to be replaced with lungs. So as an adult, they have both the cutaneous form of respiration as well as a pair of lungs. So of course you know this, but they're aquatic as tadpoles, and then they live in terrestrial habitats when they are an adult. Amphibians also have a 3-chambered heart. What does this mean again? It means they have 2 atria that share a single ventricle, and within that ventricle you're going to have a mix of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood. Amphibians also have an auricular operculum, auricular meaning the auricle or ear region. So they have a bone inside their ear that's derived from the operculum of fish, and that's used to transmit sound into the inner ear. Then lastly, for their nitrogenous waste, they excrete urea, just like us. And then they also have oviparous and ovoviviparous methods of producing offspring, so both types that involve an egg. And the reason for this is because all their eggs need to be laid in an aquatic environment. They need to be laid in water. So it makes sense because tadpoles are found in the aquatic environment, and when they grow up, they live in a terrestrial habitat. Okay, so we're almost done. We have gone through fish and amphibians. Now we are going to look at amniotes. Amniotes are reptiles, birds, and mammals. So you may encounter a trick question about amniotes. What you need to remember is that all amniotes are tetrapods. Remember, tetrapods have 4 limbs, but not all tetrapods are considered amniotes. And the reason for that is because of the amphibians. Amphibians are tetrapods, but they are not amniotes. So what is a amniote, you might ask? Well, an amniote is going to be a bird, reptile, or a mammal. Now they have shared characteristics between these 3 groups. Number 1, they have waterproof skin, so their skin is not permeable like amphibians. There's no cutaneous respiration. Now amniotes are named after the amnion found in their eggs. This is shared between all 3 groups. So you have the chorion, amnion, and allantois. These are the 3 key membranes found in the amniotic eggs. But the chorion and allantois can vary in structure and function between a mammal and a bird and a reptile. So just know that the amnion is the key shared characteristic between these 3 groups. Let's take a look at the amniotic egg and the structures it has. This is out of the scope of taxonomy, but it's still very beneficial and pertinent for the biology section. You might have like 1 or 2 questions on the amniotic egg. So let's start exteriorly. You have a shell, and that's of course for protection, but the shell has pores for gas exchange. Now you may not believe me because an exterior shell looks very smooth, but next time you have an egg for breakfast, take that shell with you to biology class and look underneath a microscope at that shell, and you'll notice that it's porous. Okay, the next key structure of an amniotic egg is going to be the albumin. This is a watery fluid consisting of water and protein that's used as a cushion. The next key structure is going to be the yolk. So this houses the nutrients and the food for the growing embryo. Now around the yolk sac and the embryo, you're going to have the chorion with chorionic villi. This is going to facilitate gas exchange. Now the waste site for the embryo is known as the allantois. And then the amnion is the membrane that's surrounding the embryo, and that's filled with amniotic fluid to protect the embryo. And the amnion is the key membrane that is shared between the three groups, namely reptiles, birds, and mammals, and it is not found within amphibians. So that's what makes an amniote an amniote. Let's look at our first group of amniotes, and that's going to be the reptiles, so turtles, snakes, lizards, and crocodiles, for example. So these are tetrapods, meaning they have 4 limbs, and they're ectothermic. They're amniotes, again, so their skin is not permeable, and they have scales present on their skin. Reptiles also express the 3 forms of producing offspring, namely oviparity, viviparity, and ovoviparity. Oviparous reptiles are always going to lay their eggs on land. All reptiles have lungs for respiration. You don't have cutaneous respiration or gills. Okay, for their circulatory system, they all have 3 chambered hearts with one exception. And the exception is that crocodiles and alligators have a 4-chambered heart. This is commonly tested on the DAT. And then finally, reptiles excrete nitrogenous waste in the form of uric acid. Birds are actually really closely related to reptiles, so they have the same type of nitrogenous waste, namely uric acid. All birds are going to be tetrapods as well as amniotes, but unlike reptiles, they are endothermic. They're endotherms. Endotherms do not vary with the external temperature. In fact, they have to rely on metabolism inside their cells to maintain homeostatic temperature in their bodies. On top of this, birds also have feathers which provide insulation to maintain that body temperature. All birds have a 4-chambered heart, just like mammals. Birds are also unique in the fact that they want to decrease their weight to stay aerodynamic, so they have pneumatic bones which have air spaces in them to make them light. Another unique feature of birds is that they have air sacs. This is the most advanced respiratory system in kingdom Animalia. So what an air sac does is it allows for unidirectional airflow. Now this is beneficial because old air, so air filled with CO2, and new air, air that has oxygen in it, does not mix. So think about it right now. You're breathing and you're inhaling that old air that you are sometimes exhaling. So birds don't have that problem. They have air sacs which allow for that unidirectional airflow, and it separates the old air from the new air. Now all birds lay eggs, we know that, so they're oviparous, and they have a cloaca. Remember, the cloaca is the opening for the excretory system, for the digestive system, as well as for the reproductive system. So we've finished up fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds. Now we are going to look at the last type of amniote, which is a mammal. And there's 3 types of mammals: monotremes, placental mammals, and marsupials. So mammals are unique in the fact that they are tetrapods, they are amniotes, they're endothermic just like birds, and they have hair or fur surrounding their body. Their skin is also very specialized. They have specialized integument with specialized glands for excretion. One of those glands is the mammary gland. Mammary glands are important because this provides the food for a newborn in the form of milk. Another unique key feature of a mammal is going to be the ossicles, or the middle ear bones. So the malleus, incus, and stapes. These bones are very unique to mammals, and they are derived from the pharyngeal slits. Just like birds, they all have a 4-chambered heart, and all mammals reproduce sexually. They can be viviparous, giving birth to live young, or they can be oviparous. Now their nitrogenous waste byproduct is going to be in the form of urea. So there's 3 groups of mammals that you need to know, and the first group are the monotremes. So a monotreme is a platypus or an anteater, for example. What's unique about these animals is that they're oviparous, meaning that they lay eggs instead of giving birth to the live young. Even though they lay eggs, their eggs look different from a bird. And that's because their outer shell for their egg is leather-like and not like a hard outer shell. And one last unique thing about monotremes is they have a cloaca, so one opening for excretion, digestion, and reproduction. The second group of mammals we need to know are the marsupials. These are going to be animals found in and around Australia. So the kangaroo, the koala, the Tasmanian devil are just a few key examples here. They are viviparous. Now what's unique here is that they carry their young in a pouch after birth, because the young are born extremely early on. They're born prematurely. So they give birth to the young inside the pouch, and then it's inside this pouch that the young can receive milk from their mother and can continue to develop and grow until they're ready for the outside world. Okay, the last type of mammal that we need to know are going to be placental mammals. Now an example of a placental mammal is an elephant or a rabbit, you and me, as well as whales. Now these animals are viviparous, meaning they give birth to live young. What's unique here is that the fetus is developed inside the mother in the uterus. There is also a placenta present, hence the name placental mammal. Now a placenta is going to facilitate the exchange of the waste byproducts from the fetus to the mother, as well as nutrient exchange from the mother to the fetus. So a typical nutrient could be oxygen, for example. So the mother is actually breathing not only for her body and her tissues, but for her child as well. And this is all due to the presence of a placenta. Ooh, good job, you guys. We just made it through the last kingdom in domain Eukarya, and that's Animalia. So we looked at all the phyla that we need to know for the DAT. Alright, congratulations on finishing all the 13 videos, but I probably know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, wow, that was an insane amount of information over these videos. How am I going to remember all this? So I included 3 key principles that I think are critical in understanding all the taxonomy on the DAT. Number 1 is applying what you have learned. So as an example of that, I personally struggled with plant taxonomy. So I would constantly be looking out the window of the library that I was studying in, and I tried to classify the various plants and trees that I saw. I also ran through those 4 plant criteria questions every night and drew out a flow chart, so I had that memorized when I took the DAT. Another way of applying information that you've learned is by boring your friends and family with those random fun facts. So an example would be the fact that we're related closer to echinoderms because they're deuterostomes and we're chordates, rather than echinoderms are to jellyfish, for example. So it's important to say things out loud. You're going to have a better chance of memorizing something when you say it out loud and teach someone about it. The second key principle, we talked about it in the first video, is going to be mapping everything out. So you have a better chance of remembering something when you actually write it down compared to when you just type it on your laptop. The last key principle is to